Today's topic is can't engage, won't engage, and it's all about engaging with people, but thinking about how to engage with people in a really different way. And we want to engage using our lived experience, and that's what we're going to be talking about today. You might ask, well, isn't engagement, isn't connecting with people also about marketing? Isn't it also about the quality of programs? Isn't it about the best clinical interventions that you can apply, public health messaging? It is absolutely about those things, but our focus, our expertise today that we're going to be talking about is engaging with people, leading through lived experience. And so the first question I often get with people with lived experiences is say, well, okay, I'm a nurse, or I'm a psychiatrist, or I'm a program manager, but I've got my own lived experience as well. And what I'd say is what makes leading with lived experience different is that you are putting your experience first. You're putting your experience or community's experience first when you're leading with that engagement. That's what makes it different. So often we will wear that label of us being a nurse, of being a therapist first, but really what we mean when we're talking about engagement led by lived experience is you're talking about that personal experience, be that your race, be that your experience of mental health issues, be that your ethnicity, the culture that you belong to. That's what you put first when you're leading your engagement. What today's session is really a lot about is using stories, personal stories, lived experience stories, and disclosing your story in a way to create connections with others. And it's about building trust, really, and we'll talk about trust an awful lot. It's about building trust on shared experience. So how do you do that in an organization where you share, where you get your staff, your community members, your volunteers to continue to build relationships that inspire trust? And so why are we talking about this? I shared a little fact at the bottom of this presentation, which is when we start to do things that are led by lived experience, we start to see things like in retention, engagement increase. So those of you may be aware of a program or an initiative called Recovery Colleges. So I won't go into detail, but if essentially they are educational mental health educational courses that are offered to people, and there's always a lived experience component in those courses, and just a tiny part of using engagement in those courses. So when people with lived experience make phone calls to the people who are about to enroll in those classes, what we see really quickly is the retention in those classes starts to improve. People stay in the class longer because they've made a connection with someone who is like them, who understands what it's like to be them. And so evaluations show that just using engagement in really small ways can dramatically start to improve how people with lots of different experiences kind of stay connected and start to benefit from the intervention that you're offering. We've got to answer the first question, which is, well, why wouldn't someone engage with a service offering that, we've proven is a really, really helpful service? It's essential, it improves people's way of living their lives, improves their health outcomes. Well, I imagine some of this might be obvious to yourselves, but I don't think there's any harm in mentioning these pieces. So I think the first part is that the service or services like that didn't work for the person, didn't work for the community. People really aren't dumb. They respond to their environment. If they've tried something a number of times and it didn't work, they will try something else. I always think about the story, of potentially people who've been living on the street for a really very long time. They will avoid potentially going to a service until they absolutely have to, because life has shown them that accessing that service will not result in a pleasant experience. They are people like them, might have been treated poorly before. They might just not know about you, and we'll go into detail about how do they actually get to know about you? How do we actually start to do that really beginning level piece? Also, obviously, like they may have been on the bad end, or they may have been on the end of systemic racism, discrimination, or just cultural exclusion. And they might not have any shared relationships with you. So often we engage with services because our friend has engaged with that service in the past, or someone has given us a really positive recommendation to connect with someone. But if there is no shared relationship, if there is no shared connection, then it's unlikely for us to engage with that service. So I've put in that red writing there, we come as a family always. And so that's an experience that we have seen over and over again in our work in Habitus, where often in Western English-speaking countries, when we are delivering services, we focus very much on the individual and their rights as an individual as they access our services. But we'll sometimes have families who say, well, we see ourselves as a family unit. We want to access this service as a family unit. And because of the way that we design our services, unintentionally, those families may not get the service that they're looking for, or their expectations may not be met, and it's unlikely we might see them again. And so how do we start to think more openly and more differently and use our own lived experience of how we would want to connect to try and make sure that we are connecting with more people? There's lots of different reasons why someone may not connect. So I wanted to put this topic out there. Just before our event, we shared some things on social media about the event, and the topic, or the words, hard to reach. Some people liked it, some people didn't like it. Some of the comments we got back were really fantastic. So and just kind of opening up understanding of what hard to reach means. I have to put my hand up and I have to say, I have so often used the terminology hard to reach because as someone who has delivered services before, there are some people who are accessing our services and we see them coming through the door an awful lot, but there's some that we would love to engage with, but we just don't see them. But then our comments through Twitter and conversations I've had over the years where people have said, well, hard to reach is so dismissive because we may not be hard to reach. And in some ways it puts the responsibility on me as a service user to change who I am, to access your service, to become easier to provide service to. So what I wanted to do is kind of put a little bit of an example at the bottom there. So that example is for a service called Recovery Cafes in the UK. So essentially, there are services, many of which are in London at the moment, where we provide crisis support, where you don't necessarily have to go to the hospital if you're struggling with your mental health. You can engage with potentially a peer support worker or with a caseworker, but it's set deeply in community, set in a community centre, a non-clinical environment. There's clinical support if you need it. And we've found that some of the recovery cafes, that the ones that are most deeply embedded into community, that are using the existing community assets, so what's already there, using peer support as an ongoing way to engage, they are reaching far more racially and ethnically diverse populations. So up to 53% of the people engaging with those supports are non-white, which for anyone who has lots of mental health or health experience or community experience, that is not typical of clinically delivered services. We see far fewer non-white people in clinical services than we would expect if comparing to the population. So I wanted to use this stat and use this example as a really a great piece of research and a great piece of leading practice to show when we use all these things at the same time, we start to find that those people who were hard to reach before start to engage more and more. So now we know the problem, we know there are some working examples out there of increasing things. What can you do as an organization? What does some of the solutions start to look like? So one of the solutions, or one of the tools I'm going to talk about today, is using the folks with lived experience and the people in your community to see them with all of the different assets that they bring. So I've used this term peer supporter a number of times while I've been speaking. So a peer supporter, you can Google them. For those of you who don't, I know that there are peer supporters in our audience, but for those of you who don't know what a peer supporter it is someone who uses their lived experience to walk alongside, connect, reduce the isolation, provide support, and to be a person there to reduce isolation for those going through lots of different issues. And you can be a peer supporter for lots of different reasons. Maybe you have a shared mental health experience, you have a shared culture, you have a shared drug use history. But we often think of peer supporter in a very traditional way. And what I wanted to share was that peer supporters can be all sorts of different roles that really start to have an amazing benefit. So here I've said that they can be researchers. They can help us learn more about the community that we're trying to solve. They can be mentors, guiding and providing feedback and advice for us as we're leading our organizations. We might not just call them peer supporters. Maybe that's not the language of our community. They are storytellers. They're able to tell a story in a way that opens up and makes a space safe for people. They're brokers, and they can be ambassadors as well. So one of the examples I wanted to share from Habitus's experience is we are currently doing a project on the legalization of cannabis in Canada. And we had made assumptions based on the usage patterns of cannabis and how people are starting to access it more legally. And based on the peer researchers' skills and the peer researchers' ability and their knowledge of their community, not only is engagement never a problem because of the immense terrific network that our peer researchers bring, those researchers with training on how to use their lived experience to connect with other people who have used, they also give us better intelligence and correct our assumptions. So we believe that people were accessing dispensaries, cannabis dispensaries, more because it was because as a result of COVID and with disruption to other means of acquiring cannabis. But what we were told by our peer researchers is it was just a nicer, safer, easier way to connect. And it wasn't necessarily because of the assumptions that we had made. And so for me, it was a really helpful challenge. And for Habitus, it's a really helpful challenge and a confidence as researchers and as people finding more evidence that we're not always right. So the final piece, and you'll be happy to hear that I'm almost at my end, is that Claire, who's one of our panelists, is going to speak to this a little bit more. That engagement not only helps us kind of fill our services with the people that we want to serve, it not only gives us intelligence of how to deliver great services, but it can move us into the next stage that so many of us crave and want, which is change. And so I've said on this slide, engagement to activation. And so we'll explore a little bit through our questions what community organizing is, and that's a big topic. But it's how we move this engagement, we move our people with lived experience into an area in which they are seen more as leaders and valued for their experience. And so when you work so hard on building trust, what you don't want to do at the end is break that trust. Engagement doesn't just happen once. I think everyone in this space knows how hard you have to work on engagement and keeping it going. But if it keeps developing and keeps growing, there is strength there, and there is more ability for us in community organizations to grow the strength and to grow and work on the change that so many of us are ultimately trying to achieve. So that is my introduction to engagement and engagement in lots of different ways. I hope you do have a couple of questions as we go. But before we go into questions, I want to introduce our panel, and I've got some questions of my own for the panel. So with us today, I'll start off by introducing Claire Robinson. Claire is an advocate, a mental health advocate and a community organizer in the Tyne and Weir area. So Claire, with that, I will let you just say hello to everyone. You can hear your voice and just give you a moment to add anything else to that introduction, and then I'll pass over to the other group.
No, thank you, Callum. Thank you. No, I'm standing in for Fiona Tasker today, who can't be here because she's contracted COVID and is really feeling quite poorly. But what Fiona has given me her consent to do is to share her testimony that Fiona has used in her community organising work through Rococo, which is the recovery college in Newcastle that both myself and Fiona know each other through. And what I do want to say, Callum, to think about what you just said about recovery colleges. So I'm a facilitator in a recovery college. I use my lived experience to help motivate, inspire others to see their own worth and their own potential. And a recovery college is one of the only places where I'm not a professional, I'm not a mum, I'm there as me, and that's incredibly liberating. It's a really, really special place to be, and I'm really excited to be here on the panel today. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Claire. I will hand over to Jennifer, David, and Penny.
Yeah, good morning, everyone, or good afternoon, depending what country you join us from today. My name is Jen, and I work in mental health and addiction at the Alex Community Health Center here in Calgary, Alberta. And I've always been just in awe working with my peer support colleagues. And while my title might imply that I'm a leader, I just really view myself as a student of life. And I'm always very hungry and very curious to learn from the humans I work with, whether it's my colleagues, the clients I work with, or anyone that I come across. So I'm very honored to be here with my colleagues, David and Penny, and I will keep my contributions to an absolute minimum because Penny and David have the real stories to tell today.
Hello, my name is David Fraser. I'm a peer support worker with the Alex, the program I work for, the Mobile Street Outreach Team. Been doing that for about a year. I've always been kind of an advocate for kind of peer-led initiatives and things that happen in the community for the populations that I deal with now professionally. So really like my job.
Thanks, David.
Hi, I'm Penny. I'm the peer support worker for the RAM team here at the Alex. I've been with them now for about 9 months, here at the Alex for about a year. I really enjoy doing what I do. Yes, some days are very trying, but I really do enjoy it, and I'm really grateful to the Alex for giving me such value as an employee and, you know, supporting me doing my job, because some days it can be really hard, like going visiting that dark place and then being able to bring yourself back from it. And you have to do that multiple times a day. So I really appreciate the support I get here from coworkers and from the leads and everybody else. And we're just all one big happy family.
Thanks so much, Penny. So I am going to ask my first question to you, Jen, and then I promise no more questions will be directed to you. But just to kind of set us up from a strategic point of view with the organization, why did the Alex choose an engagement approach that that kind of was centered in lived experience and peer support?
Yeah, Callum, thank you so much for that question. And if that's the one question I get today, I'll be very happy, because I love talking about zero barrier access. I think what we really found, and that is probably indicative of most healthcare systems, we always pride ourselves, and when I say we, I mean the collective we, that we offer low barrier services. Of course, everyone offers low barrier services because that's what you're supposed to do. And I think we often stop there and don't really consider what low barrier truly means, because what I might consider low barrier is absolutely highest barrier for someone else. And I just use like a walk-in service as an example here. Walk-in services sounds pretty low barrier, awesome. You don't need an appointment. You know, if the fancy tickle you just show up. But what about a single parent with 3 kids under the age of 10 and minus 30? Not so low barrier anymore, right? Or someone who's in a wheelchair and is not able to hop on public transit. So I really invited my leadership group and the organization as a whole to really reconsider low barrier, and just to determine that low barrier is not good enough anymore, that what we need is a zero barrier approach. And I will fully admit that zero barrier will always be aspirational, because this world is very imperfect, and what we sometimes want to do is just simply not possible. But that should always be our North Star, and something we strive for. not sit back and say that low barrier is good enough. So I have always enjoyed working with peer support in different settings, and I truly have come to believe that the peer support approach is such a big piece in this goal of zero barrier approach, because what we just simply need to accept is that we have done a shitty job helping people access us. And Caleb, I really appreciated what you said at the beginning about how to engage and how you feel it's placing the responsibility on our community members. I absolutely agree, because what has happened is that we are hard to access. And peer support staff can be that bridge, that connector, that entity that helps rebuild that trust that we have broken with our community, and can really help with hope and access and opportunity and possibility, something that other folks that have that professional title and the proverbial desk between us and the community member, we simply don't have that tool in our toolbox. So I consider myself an advocate within our organization, and hopefully in the community as well, as truly believing that peer support is something that every healthcare service or every social service truly needs to be able to move towards that goal of zero barrier support.
Thanks so much, Jen. So I think that's a really great kind of strategic perspective, but I'm really interested, Jen and David, just in what does Penny and David, what does actually engaging with your folks look like in a day-to-day as a peer supporter in the organization? What is a day like when you're engaging with folks who have been termed in the past hard to reach?
Want me to go first? When I am first engaged with somebody who is hard, like you say, hard to reach, or is shut off, or has built that wall up in front of them, I feel it's important that I sit there and I come from a place where they're at, and meet them where they're at, and I don't talk at them, I talk with them, and I make sure that I'm very clear and letting them know I am not a counselor. I'm a peer support person who has gone through the same things that they're going through, maybe not the exact same history or anything like that, but I understand the feelings and the frustration and the loneliness and stuff that all comes with addiction. And they seem to then loosen up a little bit, because they don't feel like it's so clinical, like they're not being poked and prodded by somebody, if you want to put it that way. And then they seem a little more comfortable, and then they slowly will start to open up and tell a bit of their story. But that trust isn't built in one session. I'll try and meet with them on a regular basis as much as I can. And then if they have questions for me, I always leave that open to them. Like, what would you like to know about me? And then they'll be like, oh, well, why do you understand? Like, what's your story? What'd you go through? That's what, and then once after a session or two, when they ask that question, I'm more than happy to share my story. Like, it doesn't have to be the whole hour-long thing, but I can give them a little bit of my history and some of the things I went through. So when I tell them I understand, then they know I understand. And then that's where slowly the trust starts to build. And no matter what happens with them, I let them know, if you trip and you fall, I'm going to still be right here to help pick you back up. But
that is a beautiful answer, Penny, beautifully done. I'm wondering, because peer support's not brand new to the Alex, but it is on the newer side of things. Maybe, David, you'd be okay with answering that question of where does an organization start, or maybe even just describing kind of you at the beginning and how you share who you are and how you're engaging differently to what we've traditionally done in the past.
Sure. Yeah. I think the Alex had peer support before I started. The program that I specifically worked for was the first kind of pilot mobile outreach team for the Alex, and it was interesting. think it's just the way the funding worked out, but it was 50% peer support workers and 50% kind of academic staff, so social workers. So we had kind of the highest per capita peer support kind of concentration in the organization, and I think that was a great start, and the next step in that, we had new leadership in the program as well. It was very open to kind of the ideas from the peers that were working on the team, and I'm a big believer in peers having a say in policy and having a say in how programs are designed and how they're run and how they're maintained, and because I believe that we're the ones using this service, we should have a kind of say in how it actually happens, and that manifested in a bunch of different ways. Like we handled harm reduction supplies, and we use that kind of as a two-pronged approach. It's a very important thing to have out in the community for people to have safe supplies to use substances they're going to be using anyways. And it also acts as kind of an olive branch to that connection piece to get them to start maybe accessing services that maybe they're not even aware about, or maybe they have a bad taste in their mouth. And that's when I come in as a peer support worker to build that connection piece, to put them in a space where they're able to kind of make that decision on their own to access a service like something they might need.
I really like how you put that, that they have a bad taste in their mouth, right? Because we're not always engaging with people for the first time, right? We're re-engaging with people that have been burnt in the past. Is that an accurate kind of assumption there, would you say?
Absolutely, and it's very interesting when I approach peer. There's two ways that I can approach a peer, and that's usually because I'm usually with a social worker, and I'll usually crack a joke about, I have experience with social services and how negative those experiences can be, and on the other end of that, with the people that are academic in social services, really trying their best and really trying to help folks, a lot of them. So either I'll crack a joke and I'm, like, this is James is a person I work with, and this is James. He's a social worker. Please don't hold it against him, right? And it creates kind of a clear divide between what I do and what he does, right? Or I can read somebody to, maybe they're like, I have this worker here that's amazing, and then I can tell a story about the person in my life that had an academic background in social services that I dealt with, that was great as well, and connect them with that. So yeah, I think so.
That's ace. Well, thank you all for sharing. I'm going to come back to you, and so stay off mute as I start to kind of share some more general questions. So I'm going to move on to you, Claire, and I'd love to ask you a couple of things about what engagement looks like once you have formed a relationship and what all the potential futures are. I'd love to ask you a bit about community organizing. I think it's a brand new term potentially for a number of people in the room. So maybe just the concepts around what community organizing is and its relationship to lived experience. Like, why am I even asking that question?
Okay, so community organizing is, I think of it a little bit like rewilding for humans, but I'll kind of go back to its truest form. Community organizing is a process whereby people who are angry or feel really strongly about something they've experienced or something that they've witnessed come together and act. They kind of appreciate that they do have power and they do have agency, and they act through building their leadership and influence to help make changes in the system or wherever that may be. Community organising has been used for a very long time and quite successfully. Martin Luther King and Rosa Parks were very famous community organisers of their time. In the UK, we have the living wage and we have the real living wage, and the real living wage came from an organising campaign that started off in a parish down in London, and it's definitely growing. The movement of organising in various different organisations is growing across the UK at the moment, which is brilliant.
So how does that connect then, would you say, to lived experience in the conversation today about engagement and lived experience?
So lived experience is at the centre of organising, and I'm going to talk from my own experience and with Rococo as well. So I'm part of a mental health organising group through being a facilitator and a member of Rococo, and I met Fiona through Rococo, and I'm going to read Fiona's testimony now. Actually, she's kind of given me a consent to do so, and this is a testimony that she's written for work that she's doing in organising. I'll come on to talk about a little bit about that in a moment. So, I've used talking therapies during the period of poor mental health. It was a frustrating experience for me. I felt as though I was jumping through hoops. I would do everything I was asked, but then something changed, and I would need to do something else before getting what had been promised. At an extreme low point, I was given low intensity CBT, cognitive behavioural therapy, having been told that this wasn't what I needed, but the waiting list was 9 months long and they wanted to give me this in the interim. I was then discharged rather than actually getting the treatment my original assessment concluded I needed, and at this point I felt like I was losing hope. This and a subsequent experience with the crisis team has impacted me to this day. I'm now very much recovered from that low point, and I'm determined to use my experiences to better the experience of those on a similar path and be actively involved in co-production, getting the voice of lived experience heard. One such way is being on interview panels where my perspective can really drive values-based recruitment, and I've been fortunate in carrying out this role with local universities and in various courses for voluntary sector organisations. And there's always been great feedback, and my views are always valued, and I feel equal in the decisions that have been made.
I think that's testament, right? Like that's lived experience. And I suppose that kind of easily kind of fits into my next question, really, which is, I know the answer to this, but I'd love you to add a little bit more to it. There obviously is a positive feedback loop between community organizing and engagement. But I wonder if you can tell me or explain that a little bit more. What is that feedback loop, and what does it look like?
I think there is a positive feedback loop between community organising and engagement, but not everyone will be the point. That engagement point will not necessarily be a point where they are ready or feel able to get involved in community organising. In community organising, we develop leaders, and leaders become connectors and storytellers in their community, so they can listen to lived experience of others and help to bring that back in to make changes, to shape the services, to remove those barriers. And I think that positive feedback loop extends beyond the barriers of an organisation and into communities as well. Community organising is often done what we call it broad-based, so it could a collection of people within institutions coming together, diverse institutions. And the mental health campaign in Newcastle a few years ago, one of the actions that came from that was that one of the local mosques opened up their doors and started running community meals to help kind of reduce isolation. They received mental health training so they could kind of support members of the community who actually nobody knew was struggling, and kind of build those connections as well. So the positive feedback loop in engagement and community organising in mental health it's huge. It's spiraling and it just keeps growing.
That's awesome. Well, thank you, Claire. So this is the part where I would love to open it up to questions. I know sometimes it can take a minute or two for people to type them out. So you can pop them in the chat, or you can send them privately to Lisa, whose name, or to me. I'll be able to read them too as we go. But I've already had one come in. And this is a really practical question, and I love the different ways of interpreting this. So Jen, David, Penny, Claire, feel free to jump in and fight over it. The first question is, everyone is busy. How do I make our offer important to the folks and communities that I know will benefit? So the way I read that is, if you have a strong feeling that what you're offering is really going to help your community, but the community will basically say, I'm too busy, I've got a lot on, or it's not for me. Practically, how do you use that lived experience and engagement to make it a more attractive offer?
I guess I use kind of my experience of kind of what worked for me when people were trying to explain things that might better me. And it usually was like, I always use the example, I was a substance user and it was intravenous use, and they were trying to explain to me how to keep my body safe when I was using intravenously. And I wasn't as concerned with that as I was with getting the effect I wanted out of the substance. So, a big thing I'll do when I'll talk with people about proper kind of injection practice and stuff. And I'll usually frame it in a way of, if you avoid abscesses, you can avoid, wasting the substance that you're trying to use, or, really using language and putting it in terms that not somebody just understands, but somebody values as well. And finding that connection piece. And it's always based on my lived experience. And like, I spend a lot of time in the car or on the train when we're going out to do outreach, and just kind of scenarios like, what stories can I tell to make this person care about this thing I'm about to pitch to them? Whether it's housing or whether it's whatever the resource is that somebody might need. And so a lot of it, like, I really like that somebody called peer supporters storytellers, because really it is a lot of me trying to think of stories that I can relate that will make this person kind of listen to what I have to say. Yeah.
That really helps. Claire, I wonder if you can steer us in a really different way. I know one of your many jobs and specialities is engaging professionals in different types of opportunities. And I'm wondering if you can tell us a bit about, or give us an example of engaging with potentially a very busy professional who's eligible for some really great supports, but doesn't necessarily think about you or your network kind of first.
It might seem that it's quite different, or it's quite a different question, but my response would be very similar to David's. It is it's a community organising response as well. What we do is we build relationships that kind of, we help people, or we tell stories and identify shared self-interests, and kind of are able to identify what are those hooks that are going to bring people to an event, bring people through the door, get people to show up the next time. It's what have we got in common that it's going to build trust and strengthen that relationship. I think we quite often, even in sort of the charity sector in England, we talk about scalability, we talk about growth. We can build trust, and we know how to build trust well and build it faster, but there's no shortcuts. And if we want sustainability, and if we want sustained and repeated engagement, then it's through those relationships and through that trust, whether you're a professional or whether you are accessing something not in a professional capacity.
Is there a particular professional you've engaged with that was really difficult to get on board, Claire, and you broke through and now you're best friends that you can think of? Love putting people on the spot, no worries. I can come back to you.
I think the times where I've struggled to engage is where I've gone in with a plan, or with a very strict professionally, where I've gone in going, no, I think this is right or this is wrong. And actually what it's required is to take that off. And if you can engage with someone person to person, not role to role, then actually that's where the magic happens.
That's excellent. I've got a great question here. I've got it twice actually, so I've got it in two different forms. What strategies have you used to reach smaller or niche communities? And then the other question I have is, how do you engage with people that don't know about you or don't necessarily share that experience? But let's focus on that. Have you got experiences of engaging with quite niche communities, people with experiences that very few people share, and what might you share from that experience?
Sure, yeah. And we'll encounter, like, I'll and I talk about this as well, and it's CMHA actually has a really
it's Canadian Mental Health Association, right?
Right. Sorry. Yeah. People don't know what that is. Have a really great piece on that as well. But it's, when I encounter somebody who is a, Indigenous trans sex worker, I have absolutely that's not my wheelhouse whatsoever. I have no lived experience, and I have no idea where that person is actually coming from. But when I connect with them, and something like hopelessness is conveyed, I can absolutely connect with that. And I can absolutely connect with frustration, especially with a system that's hard to interact with, hard to engage with. And I, if somebody doesn't have my exact lived experience, and nobody has my exact lived experience, I don't have anybody's exact lived experience as well. So, and I really try to stay away from, I can only peer support people who were homeless in Toronto and had intravenous substance use disorders, because that's a very niche population that it can be hard to find in Calgary, Alberta. And so I really try to connect on that feelings level, that emotional connection of the lived experience of having gone through something that makes us feel a certain way, especially helpless or hopeless.
Oh, that's really helpful.
Yeah, I just want to jump in here before Penny maybe wants to speak to this as well. But I think I just want to highlight what David said, because I think this is quite profound. This is when we talk about niche populations, it might look like a niche population, what meets the eye. But I think when you really start to unpack it, it is about shared themes like hope or like access or like seeing a path forward. And it doesn't matter whether it's a very, what we would consider niche population or even niche situation. I think there is a lot of commonality in a shared human experience. And if we can tap into that, I think that's where we start to understand how we can connect. And I also want to highlight something that David said before that I actually wrote down because I thought it was beautiful. Not just understanding what we have to offer, but the person also needs to value what we have to offer. So once we maybe sit back and let go of our I almost use the word arrogance, because I think I find that quite a bit in healthcare. When it's not about peer support, but we always think we have the best and the hottest and the most wonderful service. But do we ask the question often enough? Is it valued by the people that we're trying to reach? So I think those two things, tapping into the shared human experience, and then what does this group value that I may not see, I may not fully understand. I think that's where some of that maybe like a starting point lies, but I'm really curious what Penny has to share as well.
For me, I feel it's important, and which we have here is such a well-diversified group of peer support workers. So me, I am Indigenous. Like David said, I don't have any experience with, LGBTQ people where they're at, but we do have peer support workers here that are. So I can always reach out for guidance from them, or see if the peer would feel more comfortable talking to somebody that's, like them instead of me. So I like the fact that we have such a well-diversified group of peer support workers where we can always reach out to somebody who will know something about that.
Thanks so much, Penny, for that. I'm gonna do my best to answer that one as well. I'm not sure if the MC is allowed, but I like the topic so much. I would love to look at it as well as sometimes like communities. So I think about culturally, if you are from a particular culture and maybe you're a new immigrant or to a place and there just simply isn't that many of you, or you've gone through an experience where there simply isn't that many of you, how do you find others that are like you, not necessarily or discover that community? And I think where I would go back to is kind of to your point, Penny, is that finding maybe one or two people in your network that do have that lived experience and focus on that story and focus on its ability to engage and connect. And it starts with that one bridge, I think. And if we are truly looking at kind of the supports for that person, once we built that first bridge of trust, we can then start to, I think, Jen, you said that beautifully as well. Then we can start to look at what is it we're looking to provide for this community. It's hope, it's lack of isolation, it's good, strong connections. And it doesn't necessarily always mean to kind of tie that all together that we all have exactly the same lived experience, but it's something really exciting to explore. And we've had a question come up 3 times actually, which is really exciting, around the peer support practice itself and using lived experience, whether that's a peer support worker, it's telling your story, whether it's research, and really about those boundaries, around your sharing your own story with the person that you're connecting with, or just kind of keeping your wellness there. I think Penny, David, you both kind of mentioned that wellness piece. So I'm wondering if you can talk to that a little bit around kind of the boundaries between yourself, the people you're supporting, how you share your story, how much of the story you're sharing, and then to the last piece around how do you keep yourself grounded and connected to your community too.
personally, I've done a lot of work, kind of being able to empower myself with my story and my lived experience. So there's not really a lot that's off the table. There's not really a lot that um, that takes much out of me when I need to use it as a tool for peer support. But my the stories of my lived experience is a big part of it, but it's not always the first thing I use as well. It's usually um, knowing about kind of somebody's body language or somebody's cadence or the way somebody speaks and knowing how to speak in that way. But it's hard for me to say. I'll have moments where kind of the things I see with the clients that I interact with, the peers that I interact with, and the hardships they go through that can affect me. And but as a person who lives in recovery from my lived experience, I just have a practice that I've been kind of honing for some years now, and I just kind of rely on that. But for the most part, I do my best as a peer support worker to take myself out of the equation and realize that I'm there to do a job, and my job is to use my lived experience as a tool to empower somebody else, and that usually helps me distinguish boundaries between myself and a peer, and maybe what would be appropriate to share, or what would be appropriate to connect on them with, and yeah, and that one's a little harder to explain, but it's a very good question.
No, I think you did a great answer. Really simply put, because I think sometimes people ask this, and again, feel free to refuse my question. I love a challenge. Is does peer support fill your cup up, or does it take away from your cup, if that makes sense?
I think it depends on how full my cup is on that day.
Yeah, I think we can all relate to that one.
Or what cup I brought to the office.
Or I even brought one.
Yeah.
Is it a cup or a mug?
Yeah. Sometimes you'll come off a huge win with the clients, and all the stars align that day, and something amazing happened with them, and you walk away, and yeah, I sleep like a baby that night, and I want to go out dancing, and then other days you're just trying to get through it, and it is a bit of a grind, and it doesn't feel as rewarding as other days does, but I don't think I ever lose sight of how necessary and how important the work is, and that really keeps me going, especially on hard days, for sure.
I
It's
think
important to have balance.
go for it,
I find
Penny.
it very important to have balance between your work life and your home life. I learned that lesson not too long ago. And sometimes you can't give your all to work, and then if something happens in your life, you have nothing left for you. So then you don't know how to deal with that little mini crisis, and it becomes a big crisis for you. So I had to learn balance, and I had to make sure that I was doing self-care and doing my own self-check-ins. When I get up in the morning, how are you doing today? How are you feeling? Is today a good day? Are you there, or are you preoccupied? Like, I do self-check-ins and make sure that I do my best to stay strong and to make my boundaries very clear to the peer I'm talking to, and try not to go past them, because that's when things start to get out of balance and you start to lose focus. And then you want to try and be friends with this person, or you start to care too much, and it starts to get a little draining. So it's balance, I find, is very important.
I think what's funny is that you've both used answers that, having someone myself who I don't know if I'm professional, but I've worked in the social and health services for a long time, and I would use all those same things. I suppose last question to you, Claire, is, and then I'm going to answer one of the questions myself in the chat, but kind of same question, but just thinking as well. So you had shared in your introduction that you're someone who kind of wears those two hats. You're a social worker, but you do deliver and share your own lived experience and are open about that. And I'm wondering, same question to yourself, as maintaining those boundaries as you share lived experience. What does that look like for you?
It looks like that boundaries that have been developed over time. And I think when you mentioned balance there, I think balance is the key. Always checking in, like, what is my intention in sharing this? Is my intention to build connection? And am I in a good place to do that? Do I feel safe to do that? actually am I sharing because that this is something that's going on for me and I want to offload? Where's the barrier there? And definitely that I think that good support around you from the organisation and good self-care practices are things that help you to maintain that. And if ever I am sharing, I will ask, is it okay if I share this with you? Is it okay if I share this because I'd like to kind of illustrate something? It's always checking in and making sure that actually this isn't, the tables aren't turning here. Like, I'm here for you, and actually I want to use this in a positive way to illustrate that actually we're not different, we're the same.
Oh, thank you for that, Claire. Well, we're almost at the end, and there's just one quick question there about staff, peer support staff getting supervision and connection. So I'm just going to answer that question myself, just out of brevity, is to say that great peer support practice, peer supporters are always connected. They always receive either mentorship or supervision, depending on the lingo that you use locally. I know in Canada, it's stressed that it's mentorship rather than supervision, and that no one is practicing on their own, because I think that's when things absolutely do go awry, or they're just not very sustainable in the long term. But we're almost at the end. So I was just wondering, any kind of closing thoughts or bits of advice that anyone would like to share across the panel with the rest of the members here, on what to remember when engaging with people who don't necessarily have or haven't necessarily engaged in the past or don't want to engage in the future.
Patience. Patience, and just take it slow. Don't try and dive right in there because that person might not be ready for that. So just patience and slow. Take it slow.
I would say listen to what somebody is telling you and take it seriously as well. I think that's the key, is challenging the status quo of what this sector has always kind of operated as, and to start turning that power back to the people that are utilizing it. And it starts with listening.
That's awesome. Thanks. Well, I might just summarize quickly. So today we have talked about different ways of engaging, why people may not engage with the service, and then how we use lived experiences, stories, to learn in lots of different ways, whether that's learned through peer research, so gaining more insight into the community we're trying to serve, whether that's to bring more people in by using connections that we already have that exist to build more trust and networks out there to bring people into our services. And then finally, we've thought about how do we use lived experience to move our organizations to the next step. Which can be done by things like community organizing, like developing leaders with lived experience in the community and ambassadors to kind of move us forward. So we are at the end.